A unique journey, the history of New Zealand. New Zealand is a geographically isolated country, located in the middle of the vast ocean and far from large land masses. This isolated location has created a very special natural environment, unlike any other place on Earth. The temperate climate, diverse ecosystems and wild landscapes with majestic mountains, pristine beaches and primeval forests have created the unique beauty of New Zealand. This isolation not only creates a magical nature, but also nurtures the rich culture of the Māori people, an indigenous community that has existed and developed for many centuries, creating a distinct identity that is difficult to find anywhere else in the world. About 800 years ago, from 1250 to 1300, Polynesians, with their excellent maritime abilities, began their long journey to New Zealand. This was part of a larger Polynesian expansion in the Pacific, extending their presence from the larger islands of Hawaii and Easter Island to more distant regions. Using large canoes called waka, the Polynesians crossed the vast distances between islands, using their ability to navigate by the stars and ocean currents. This skill not only helped them settle New Zealand, but was also a feat of courage and ingenuity that opened a new chapter in the history of the land. When the Polynesians arrived in New Zealand, they brought with them not only navigational, agricultural, and handicraft techniques, but also a complex social system. The Māori people, descendants of the Polynesian explorers, built a strong society with tribes called hapu, organized around family and bloodline values. One of the important elements of Māori society is the wakapa system, which records history, ancestors, and spiritual beliefs. This helps the Māori maintain a strong connection with their ancestors and the surrounding environment. Respect for ancestors and nature has formed a solid foundation for religious and cultural ceremonies, which in turn creates a strong and cohesive community. The Māori also place great importance on protecting their community, and one of the ways they do this is by building fortified villages on high ground called PAs. These villages not only serve as defenses, protecting the community from attacks by rival tribes, but also serve as centers of social and religious activities. PAs are built with solid structures, surrounded by stone walls and sophisticated defenses to ensure the safety of the people during times of war. It is also a place of festivals and rituals, where the community gathers to maintain unity and fighting spirit. The Māori religion is polytheistic, with gods governing every aspect of life, from human creation to the changing seasons and natural resources. These gods are not only revered figures, but also symbols of balance with nature, which the Māori hold in high regard. Māori religious ceremonies are often associated with natural elements such as the changing seasons, crops and resources. Dances, such as the haka, are an integral part of war rituals, demonstrating the tribe's strength and unity before each battle. When Europeans, especially the explorer Abel Tasman, first arrived in New Zealand in 1642, the country already had a deep culture and a strong society. However, it was the arrival of Europeans in the late 18th century, especially Captain James Cook, that ushered in a new era for New Zealand. The encounter between the Māori and Europeans was not only a cultural exchange, but also the beginning of a profound change in society, territory, and power. Conflicts over land and power arose, but it was also from these encounters that New Zealand gradually became a country with strong changes, opening up a new future for both the Māori and those coming from the West. The development of modern New Zealand has been a long journey, starting with the initial migrations and spanning centuries, gradually transforming it from an isolated country with a unique culture into one of the prominent destinations and home to many people from all over the world. In the early days, New Zealand was not only a remote land with beautiful natural landscapes, but also a place where distinct cultures developed. However, with the arrival of explorers and increasingly close relationships with other countries, New Zealand began to transform into a modern, integrated, and strongly developed country. Abel Tasman's expedition in 1642 was one of the first to put New Zealand on the world map. Tasman, a Dutch explorer, was the first European to record New Zealand during his voyage. He mapped the northwest coast of the South Island and had an encounter with the Māori people at Golden Bay. However, this encounter was not peaceful and quickly turned violent, resulting in the deaths of 4 members of Tasman's crew. Although he did not land or leave New Zealand after this event, Tasman's expedition put New Zealand on the European map, and he named the land Nova Zealandia, after the Dutch province of Zealand. More than 100 years later, in 1769, British Captain James Cook arrived in New Zealand during a trans-Pacific voyage. During this expedition, Cook made several landings on both the North and South Islands, and, more importantly, he developed friendly relations with the Māori, despite occasional conflicts. This relationship allowed Cook time to map New Zealand, a work that would prove crucial for his subsequent expeditions in 1772 and 1776. These maps not only served Cook himself well on his later voyages, but also provided important material for other European explorers, thus opening the door for European penetration and development in New Zealand. In the 1770s, James Cook claimed New Zealand on behalf of the British Crown, but his attempts to colonize New Zealand, as they had done in Australia, were unsuccessful. Instead, New Zealand continued to be an important stop for whaling and trading ships from Britain, France, and America. These ships traded goods such as tools and cloth for valuable resources, such as flax and food from the Māori. This trade not only enriched the New Zealand economy, but also created a cultural exchange between Europeans and Māori. However, the early 19th century saw more intense conflict. Although many contacts between the Māori and Europeans were peaceful, the introduction of firearms created an arms race between Māori tribes. Tribes competed for European weapons, leading to a series of wars known as the Musket Wars, which lasted from 1806 to 1845. Some 3.00 battles were fought during this period, killing between 20.00 and 40.00 people, and significantly changing the tribal structure of New Zealand. While war and conflict remained an integral part of New Zealand's history throughout this period, there was also European settlement, particularly in the early 19th century. Some sailors chose to settle in New Zealand, forming permanent communities in areas such as the Bay of Islands and Hokianga Northland. Many of these settlers were runaway sailors or criminals who had escaped from Australian prisons and were known as Pāka Maui, European Maui. They mixed with the indigenous Māori people and established mixed communities, which were an important part of New Zealand's early development. All of these events, from the early explorations to the wars and European settlement, have contributed significantly to the formation of New Zealand as we know it today. The country has gradually become a melting pot of cultures, where the interaction between the Māori and Europeans has created a unique identity. Migration and development in the following centuries have helped New Zealand become a modern, diverse and prominent country in the international community. In the early 19th century, when New Zealand was still a wild land, an important meeting between two cultures took place at Aihi Bay. It was the arrival of Samuel Marsden, a British missionary, who began the work of spreading Christianity to the Māori. Marsden not only brought new religious values but also played an important role in recording the Māori language in written form. This was a major turning point, as the Māori began to have the tools to formally record their stories and traditions, helping to preserve this unique culture throughout the following centuries. Marsden's work was not simply a missionary work, but a bridge between the new spiritual values and the Māori's long-standing cultural values, helping them maintain their identity in a changing world. Meanwhile, the 1830s saw a surge of British settlement, creating a large wave of migration. But New Zealand had not yet officially become a British colony. At this time, the New Zealand Company, a private consortium of British investors, began to seek to purchase land from the Māori. Although these transactions were done under contracts, many of them were questionable in terms of transparency and fairness. The company not only wanted to take over land but also sought to turn New Zealand into a commercial colony, which created great concerns that the Māori might lose control of their land. This tension led to a major decision by the British government to resolve the issue of sovereignty and protect the rights of the Māori people. In early 1840, with concerns about the ambitions of the New Zealand Company and the threat of losing sovereignty, the British government temporarily annexed New Zealand to the colony of New South Wales. A key event occurred on 6 February 1840, when Captain William Hobson, the British representative, signed the Treaty of Waitangi with about 40 Māori chiefs, marking a turning point in formally confirming British sovereignty over New Zealand and pledging to protect the rights of the Māori people. However, disagreements in the interpretation of the English and Māori versions of the treaty led to many disputes, especially over land ownership, which opened up persistent conflicts later. Not long after, in 1841, New Zealand officially became a British colony and separated from New South Wales. This decision not only changed the political structure of the country, but also led to a new wave of British settlers. These people, looking for new opportunities and a better life, migrated to New Zealand, creating an important turning point in the development of this country. It was this change that began to dramatically change the appearance of New Zealand, from a wild land to a populous and promising colony. In the 1840s and 1850s, the wave of European immigration continued to increase, and with it, new settlements were established, such as Auckland in 1840 and Christchurch in 1848. These settlements, along with older settlements such as Wellington established in 1839, gradually formed large cities, contributing significantly to the economic and social development of New Zealand. Wellington, with its strategic location, became the capital of New Zealand in 1865, marking an important milestone in the development of the country. Along with these changes, New Zealand became not only a place of British settlement, but also a country with diverse cultures, as the values of the Māori and European settlers began to blend together. Although the Māori initially welcomed the Europeans with the hope of opening up opportunities for trade and development, disputes over land began to arise as European settlers rapidly increased in number and began to demand more and more land. One of the first significant conflicts between the British and the Māori was the Flagstaff War, which took place from 1845 to 1846. The main cause of the war was the Māori, particularly under the leadership of Chief Hohenheck, who opposed the Europeans' control of their land and the treaties of the British government. This war, although it ended in a ceasefire, marked the beginning of a series of larger conflicts between the Māori and the British in the years that followed, as relations between the two sides became increasingly strained. The increase in European population and the need for land for agriculture, especially sheep farming, led to a series of conflicts and land grabs from the Māori. This led to a war lasting over a decade, known as the New Zealand War, which began in the 1860s and lasted until 1872. The war saw the participation of around 18,000 British troops and 5,000 Māori warriors, with fierce battles taking place across New Zealand. Ultimately, the British prevailed, confiscating over 6,000 square miles of Māori land. Although victorious, The war left deep bitterness and resentment among the Māori, and its effects were not resolved for generations, as disputes over land ownership and resource allocation remained unresolved. In the increasingly complex social and political context, the British government realized that New Zealand needed an independent political system to govern itself and develop. In 1852, to meet this need, the British government decided to establish a central government for New Zealand. This decision allowed the New Zealand people to govern the country through an elected parliament, marking the first step in the transition from a British colony to a self-governing nation. The establishment of a central government opened the opportunity for New Zealand to develop into a more independent nation, although its relationship with Britain was still maintained. The 1850s and early 1860s saw New Zealand prosper due to the development of agriculture, especially sheep farming, and the discovery of gold mines. The discovery of gold in areas such as Otago triggered a new wave of migration, attracting thousands of people from all over the world to seek their fortune. New Zealand's population increased dramatically from just 71,000 in 1859 to 164,000 in 1863. Along with the increase in population, European settlements also grew, boosting the New Zealand economy and creating a cross-cultural exchange from the Māori to European settlers and other ethnic groups. By the end of the 19th century, under the leadership of Prime Minister Julius Vogel, New Zealand entered a period of strong infrastructural development, with the construction of important public works such as railways and the telegraph system. These were the projects that connected the regions of the country and facilitated economic development. At the same time, the Liberal government under Prime Minister Richard Sedin began to establish a welfare state, with provisions for old age pensions and a minimum wage, creating a social security system for the people. In 1893, New Zealand made an important mark in world history when it became the first country to grant universal suffrage to women. This was a milestone in the feminist movement and a testament to New Zealand's progressive development, not only in the political sphere, but also in promoting equal rights for all citizens. At the end of 1907, New Zealand officially became a self-governing country, marking an important turning point in the process towards full independence, while still maintaining ties to the British monarchy. Becoming a dominion brought political autonomy, allowing New Zealand to govern its own affairs without direct interference from the British government. This decision was not only a step forward in consolidating New Zealand's power, but also an important milestone in the country's journey to self-determination, opening the door for them to freely shape their future without being beholden to Western powers. This event marked the beginning of New Zealand's assertion of itself on the international stage. However, a major challenge soon came to the country. When World War I broke out in 1914, although New Zealand was far from the main battlefields in Europe and the Middle East, the country was still involved in the global war. The New Zealand Army was quickly involved in major campaigns, notably in the Battle of Gallipoli and on the Western Front. Although New Zealand was a small country, the sacrifice of more than 18,000 New Zealand soldiers in those campaigns became a symbol of the nation's psychological independence. They fought not only for Britain, but also for the honor and future of their own country. And this sacrifice is forever etched in the minds of New Zealanders, becoming an indispensable part of the story of their growth and the affirmation of their national identity. After the war, the interwar years 1930-1939 were a difficult period for New Zealand. The Great Depression had a profound impact on the economy and caused many social tensions. Internal problems and political tensions with Britain, especially regarding international issues, further complicated the situation. However, at this time, the relationship between New Zealand and Britain remained close, But these difficulties did not last forever. The situation changed when World War II broke out in 1939. Although New Zealand faced a threat from the Japanese Empire in the Indo-Pacific region, the bulk of the New Zealand military was deployed to fight in Europe and North Africa. The country not only contributed to the fighting, but also provided vital resources to Britain, including food, personnel, and war materiel. New Zealand made a significant contribution to the British-led war effort, highlighting the country's role in global events after the war. In the period 1945-1960, New Zealand's relationship with Britain began to change markedly. Although they remained close, the rise of the United States in the Pacific region led New Zealand and Australia to view the United States as an important strategic partner for their security. The United States' emergence as the main strategic partner led to New Zealand's involvement in the Vietnam War conflicts in the 1960s. This was a controversial decision and faced strong domestic opposition, with many New Zealanders disagreeing with involvement in a war they saw as not directly in their national interest. However, this shift reflected a major change in New Zealand's foreign policy, as they began to seek security protection from a new superpower, the United States, rather than continuing to rely on Britain, a country that had been a colonial power in the past. This shift in New Zealand's international relations reflects a country that is moving away from the influence of its former empire and asserting its place in a new world where international relations are built on cooperation and strategic alliances rather than dependence on a single power. In 1986, New Zealand made a significant decision that reflected its strong commitment to global peace and security. The country declared a completely anti-nuclear policy, refusing to allow other countries' nuclear-armed warships to pass through its territory. This decision was not only a stand against the proliferation of nuclear weapons, but also a clear statement of New Zealand's choice to protect its own peaceful and secure environment. However, this decision had a major consequence. The country was suspended from the ANZUS Treaty, Australia-New Zealand-United States Collective Security Treaty, a major military alliance between the three countries. Relations with the United States, which was one of New Zealand's main strategic partners, became strained. This was a significant turning point, because although New Zealand continued to maintain peaceful relations with many countries, it also marked a major change in the country's foreign policy, as it actively distanced itself from military commitments involving nuclear weapons. While its foreign policy changed, New Zealand also witnessed a strong social and cultural transformation in the second half of the 20th century. One of the most important steps was the liberal immigration policy, which allowed people from all over the world, especially from Asian countries, to immigrate to New Zealand. This was a major shift in changing the population structure and culture of the country. As immigration from the UK declined, Australia became the largest contributor to New Zealand's migration, cementing the special relationship between the two countries. However, this change was not limited to the settler community, but also had a major impact on the Māori community, the indigenous people of New Zealand. During these years, the Māori people experienced a strong cultural and linguistic renaissance as they began to reclaim their traditional cultural values. One of the key turning points was in 1987, when the Māori language was recognized as an official language of the country. This was not only a legal recognition, but also a major step forward in preserving and promoting the Māori culture, helping them maintain their cultural identity in an increasingly globalized world. At the same time, the Māori people also became more active in politics, not only to protect their rights, but also to participate in national issues, fighting for fairness and equality in society. Today, New Zealand has become one of the most sought-after destinations in the world. This country attracts tourists not only because of its beautiful natural landscape, from snow-capped mountains to pristine beaches, but also because of its ideal living environment, developed economy, and stable politics. New Zealand has affirmed its position as a diverse and modern country, with a harmonious combination of cultures, from the Māori community to immigrant communities from Asia, Europe, and other regions. This diversity not only enriches social life, but also creates a space where people can live peacefully and prosperously. New Zealand's unique and attractive way of life, with its respect for nature and social values, has made the country a model of sustainable development and global integration, while still retaining its own unique, distinct identity.